The early 15th century marked the latter part of the Middle Ages, a time when France was embroiled in the devastating Hundred Years' War. This prolonged conflict between England and France had created a deeply divided kingdom, with English and Burgundian forces controlling much of northern France, including Paris. The political landscape was complex and fractured, with shifting alliances and contested claims to the French throne. The atmosphere of medieval France during this period was a rich tapestry of sights, sounds, and smells that defined daily life. Church bells rang regularly across towns and villages, marking the hours and calling faithful to prayer. Market squares buzzed with merchants' calls and the gossip of townspeople, while whispers and rumors of war spread through communities. The air was often thick with the smoke from burning villages, a common sight during wartime, mixed with the familiar scent of incense wafting from churches and cathedrals. The architectural landscape was dominated by imposing stone castles and fortifications, symbols of feudal power and military necessity. Common people lived in wooden houses with thatched roofs in both rural and urban areas. Towns were connected by dirt roads that turned to mud during rainy seasons, making travel difficult and communication between regions slow and challenging. Fashion and dress clearly depicted the social hierarchy. Knights and men-at-arms wore sophisticated plate armor, representing the height of military technology. Noble ladies dressed in long, elaborate gowns made from expensive fabrics, often featuring intricate embroidery and fine details. In contrast, peasants wore simple tunics made from rough wool or linen, their clothing practical and unadorned. Military technology was in a period of significant transition. Traditional siege weapons like trebuchets and catapults were still in use, but early firearms such as primitive cannons and handheld guns were beginning to appear on battlefields. These early gunpowder weapons, while still unreliable, were starting to change military tactics and castle design. Gothic architecture reached its zenith during this period, with magnificent cathedrals featuring pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and flying buttresses dominating the skylines of major cities. The period was marked by significant advances in military engineering, with castles and fortifications becoming more sophisticated in response to new weapons and siege techniques. This was also an era of artistic and architectural achievement, despite the ongoing warfare, with Gothic style reaching its mature phase in religious and secular buildings throughout France. This was the world into which Joan of Arc was born, a France torn by war, where the old feudal order was slowly giving way to new political and military realities, and where the daily lives of people were deeply influenced by both religious devotion and the constant threat of violence and upheaval. Joan of Arc emerged from the most humble of beginnings to become one of history's most remarkable figures. Born in 1412 in the small village of Domremy to peasant parents Jacques d'Arc and Isabelle Romy, she grew up in a time of profound turmoil. Despite her lack of formal education, Joan was deeply pious and learned her faith from her mother. Her transformation from a simple peasant girl to a military leader was unprecedented in medieval Europe, especially given her young age of merely 17 when she began her military campaign. The future Charles VII of France, known as the Dauphin during Joan's time, played a pivotal role in her story. When Joan first met him, he was a contested heir to the French throne, having been disinherited by the Treaty of Troyes in favor of the English king's infant son. Described as a cautious and sometimes indecisive figure, Charles initially met Joan's claims with skepticism. However, after a private conversation, the contents of which remain a mystery to this day, he became convinced of her divine mission and granted her authority to lead troops. John, Duke of Bedford, served as regent for the young English king Henry VI in France. A skilled administrator and military commander, Bedford worked tirelessly to maintain English control over northern France. His strategic abilities and political acumen made him a formidable opponent to both Joan and Charles VII. Under his regency, English forces maintained a strong grip on conquered French territories and nearly succeeded in securing the entire kingdom. Jean de Metz, a noble knight, played a crucial role as the first person of significance to believe in Joan's divine mission. In February 1429, when Joan sought to meet the Dauphin, it was de Metz who first took her seriously. He famously asked her, "What are you doing here? Must the king be driven from his kingdom, and must we all become English?" His support was instrumental in securing her passage to Chinon to meet Charles VII. Among Joan's most formidable opponents was Pierre Cauchon, Bishop of Beauvais. A skilled politician and churchman, Cauchon aligned himself with the English cause and presided over Joan's trial in Rouen. His conduct of the trial has been heavily criticized by historians for its clear political motivation and procedural irregularities. Cauchon worked tirelessly to prove Joan was a heretic, carefully manipulating the trial proceedings to ensure her conviction. John of Lancaster, Duke of Bedford, served as the English military commander and regent for the young King Henry VI. He was responsible for maintaining English control over occupied France and saw Joan as a serious threat to English dominion. Under his command, English forces fought fiercely against Joan's armies and ultimately captured her through Burgundian allies. These figures operated within a complex web of political and religious loyalties. Joan's interaction with them reveals much about the power structures of medieval France. While some, like Jean de Metz, saw in her a divine messenger capable of saving France, others, like Cauchon and Bedford, viewed her as a dangerous threat to their political and religious authority. Charles VII's relationship with Joan was particularly complex. While he owed his crown largely to her efforts, he made no attempt to rescue her after her capture, a fact that has troubled historians for centuries. The dynamics between these key figures highlight the intricate nature of medieval power politics, where religious authority, military might, and political legitimacy were inextricably intertwined. Their various responses to Joan, from passionate support to deadly opposition, demonstrate how her unprecedented rise challenged the established order of 15th-century France. The narrative of Joan of Arc interweaves three fundamental themes that resonated deeply in medieval France: faith, power, and national identity. These elements combine to create a story that continues to captivate audiences centuries later, as it addresses universal questions about personal conviction, divine authority, and the nature of loyalty. At its core, Joan's story epitomizes the complex relationship between individual faith and institutional power. Her deep personal conviction that she received divine messages directly from God challenged the Church's traditional role as the sole intermediary between the divine and mortal realm. This spiritual aspect of her story was inextricably linked to the emerging concept of French national identity, as her mission united religious fervor with patriotic duty. The personal conflicts Joan faced were extraordinary. As a young peasant girl in a rigidly hierarchical society, she defied nearly every social convention of her time. The mere act of wearing male clothing and armor was a dramatic transgression of gender norms. Her assertion of authority over male soldiers and nobility challenged deeply entrenched social hierarchies. Despite lacking formal education or military training, she commanded armies and advised kings, actions that were unprecedented for someone of her gender and social status. The political dimension of Joan's story centered on the struggle for French throne legitimacy. The conflict between Charles VII and Henry VI of England wasn't simply about territorial control. It was about the very nature of kingship and divine right. Joan's arrival at court and her recognition of Charles VII as the true heir, despite his own self-doubt, added a mystical dimension to his claim to the throne. Her success in having him crowned at Reims was a powerful symbolic victory that transformed the political landscape. The spiritual conflict in Joan's story represents one of the most complex aspects of her legacy. Her direct communication with divine voices bypassed the traditional church hierarchy, presenting a challenge to ecclesiastical authority. The Church's response to her claims evolved from initial acceptance to hostile suspicion. This tension between personal spiritual experience and institutional religious authority would later become a central issue in her trial and eventual execution. The story is marked by several dramatic turning points that shaped its trajectory. The first major reversal came with her unexpected acceptance by the Dauphin. Despite initial skepticism, Charles VII's decision to trust this unknown peasant girl marked a crucial shift in her fortune. The private conversation between them, where she reportedly revealed a secret known only to him, remains one of history's intriguing mysteries. Her military victories represent another series of remarkable reversals. The lifting of the siege of Orleans in particular was a stunning achievement that transformed the course of the war. Joan's unconventional tactics and her ability to inspire troops led to a string of victories that seemed miraculous to contemporaries. Her success challenged traditional military wisdom and demonstrated her exceptional leadership abilities. The final dramatic turn came with her capture near Compiègne in 1430. The circumstances of her capture suggested betrayal, though historians debate whether it was intentional or merely unfortunate. The failure of Charles VII to attempt her rescue, despite her crucial role in securing his crown, remains one of the most controversial aspects of her story. Her capture led to a trial that would transform her from military leader to martyr. Throughout these events, the interplay between personal faith, political power, and emerging national identity created a narrative that transcended its medieval context. Joan's story became a powerful symbol of French nationalism, religious devotion, and individual courage in the face of institutional opposition. The conflicts she faced, personal, political, and spiritual, continue to resonate because they speak to fundamental human experiences of faith, duty, and identity. The ultimate tragedy of her execution at the stake, followed by her later canonization as a saint, represents the final ironic turn in a story filled with dramatic reversals. Her transformation from condemned heretic to celebrated saint encapsulates the complex and often contradictory nature of medieval society's approach to power, faith, and gender roles. Life in medieval France during the early 15th century was strictly hierarchical, with each social class having clearly defined roles and expectations. Understanding this social structure is crucial to appreciating the extraordinary nature of Joan of Arc's achievements. In Domremy, Joan's village, daily life followed the rhythms of agricultural seasons. Peasant families like the Darcs lived in modest homes, typically one-room structures with earthen floors and thatched roofs. Their days began at dawn, with work in the fields dominating their lives. Children like Joan would have helped with farming tasks, tending animals, and household chores from an early age. The village community centered around the local church, where regular religious services structured both the day and the year through various feast days and celebrations. The medieval military structure was built upon the feudal system. Professional soldiers were rare. Armies consisted primarily of noble knights and their retinues, supplemented by mercenaries and levied peasants. Knights underwent years of training from childhood, learning combat skills, horsemanship, and the code of chivalry. The fact that Joan, with no military training, successfully commanded such forces was unprecedented. Women's roles in medieval society were severely restricted. Peasant women worked alongside men in fields while also managing households and raising children. Noble women were expected to manage estates and arrange advantageous marriages. Military leadership was exclusively male, making Joan's position as a military commander even more remarkable. Women were generally excluded from positions of public authority, with their lives largely controlled by male family members. The French nobility during this period was deeply divided. Some supported the Dauphin's claim to the throne, while others allied with the English and Burgundians. This division went beyond simple political loyalty. It reflected complex networks of family ties, feudal obligations, and regional interests. Noble families often found themselves torn between competing loyalties, leading to shifting alliances that complicated the war effort. The impact of the 100 Years' War on peasant communities was devastating. Villages faced routine pillaging by both friendly and enemy forces. Agricultural production was disrupted, leading to food shortages and famine. Many peasants fled to walled towns for protection, abandoning their fields. The war created a climate of constant insecurity, with bandits and deserters preying on vulnerable communities. The Catholic clergy's response to Joan revealed deep divisions within the church. Some clerics supported her, seeing her as divinely inspired, while others viewed her with suspicion or outright hostility. The church hierarchy was closely intertwined with political power, and many clergy members aligned themselves with either the French or English cause. This political division influenced their interpretation of Joan's claims of divine guidance. Lower-ranking priests, who were closer to the common people, often viewed Joan more favorably than the higher church hierarchy. They were more accepting of popular religious expressions and more likely to support Joan's mission as a manifestation of divine will. This division within the clergy reflected broader tensions between popular piety and institutional church authority. Joan's emergence challenged these established social structures in unprecedented ways. Her ability to transcend the rigid social hierarchy of her time was remarkable. She moved from the lowest ranks of society to commanding armies and advising kings, breaking through barriers of class, gender, and institutional authority. What made Joan truly extraordinary was not just that she challenged these social norms, but that she succeeded in doing so, at least temporarily. Her success in military leadership, her influence over the Dauphin, and her role in the coronation at Reims demonstrated that the seemingly rigid social structures of medieval France could be transcended through a combination of personal conviction, charismatic leadership, and timing. Her story resonated deeply with common people, who saw in her the possibility that someone from their ranks could rise to prominence and influence national events. She became a powerful symbol of divine favor for the French cause, helping to transform a dynastic conflict into a nascent expression of French national identity. The social structures that Joan challenged ultimately reasserted themselves with her capture and execution, but her legacy continued to inspire questions about the nature of authority, the role of women, and the relationship between divine calling and institutional power. Her story remains a powerful reminder of how exceptional individuals can transcend the social constraints of their time, even in the face of ultimate persecution. The trajectory of Joan of Arc was marked by several pivotal events that transformed her from a peasant girl into a legendary figure of French history. These key moments shaped not only her personal destiny, but also the fate of France itself. At the age of 13, Joan began experiencing what she described as divine visions in her father's garden. These mystical encounters would profoundly shape her future mission. The voices she heard identified themselves as Saint Michael the Archangel, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and Saint Margaret of Antioch. These saints were particularly significant in medieval French devotion. Saint Michael was considered the protector of France, while Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret were popular models of female sanctity and courage. The messages conveyed through these visions were initially personal, urging Joan to live a pious life. However, they gradually became more specific and politically oriented, eventually commanding her to help the Dauphin reclaim his throne and drive the English from France. These visions continued throughout her life, providing her with guidance and comfort, even during her imprisonment and trial. The lifting of the siege of Orleans stands as Joan's most remarkable military achievement. When she arrived at the besieged city, the situation appeared hopeless. The English had constructed a ring of fortifications around Orleans and had been maintaining the siege for 7 months. Joan's approach to warfare proved revolutionary. She combined aggressive tactics with powerful psychological warfare. Her strategy involved direct assaults on English positions, contrary to the more cautious approach favored by veteran commanders. She personally led charges, displaying remarkable courage that inspired her troops. Perhaps more importantly, her presence had an enormous impact on morale. French soldiers believed they were fighting alongside a divine messenger, while English troops feared they were battling against supernatural forces. The siege was lifted in just 9 days after Joan's arrival, a victory that seemed miraculous to contemporaries. This triumph marked a turning point in the 100 Years' War, revitalizing French resistance and beginning a series of victories that would ultimately lead to French independence. Following the victory at Orleans, Joan convinced the Dauphin to make a bold journey to Reims for his coronation. This was a dangerous undertaking, as the route passed through enemy-controlled territory. The journey required capturing several English-held towns along the way, including Troyes and Chalons. The coronation ceremony at Reims Cathedral was a powerful symbolic victory. By being crowned in the traditional location of French royal consecration, Charles VII gained tremendous legitimacy. Joan stood beside the altar during the ceremony, holding her banner, having fulfilled a major part of her divine mission. This event transformed Charles from the disputed Dauphin into the officially anointed King of France. Joan's remarkable journey came to a tragic end, beginning with her capture at Compiègne on May 23, 1430. While leading a sortie against Burgundian forces, she became trapped outside the city gates, which closed before she could retreat. Whether this was due to treachery or military necessity remains debated by historians. The subsequent trial in Rouen was a complex political and religious proceeding. Though technically an ecclesiastical trial for heresy, it was clearly politically motivated. Bishop Pierre Cauchon, who owed his position to English support, presided over a tribunal that was decidedly hostile to Joan. The trial lasted from January to May 1431 and involved sophisticated theological arguments. Joan faced questioning about her visions, her male attire, and her claims of divine guidance. Despite lacking formal education, she showed remarkable composure and intelligence in defending herself. Her responses to complex theological questions often demonstrated surprising wisdom and quick wit. The proceedings culminated in her conviction and execution by burning at the stake on May 30, 1431, in Rouen marketplace. She was just 19 years old. Her final moments were marked by great courage, as she continued to maintain the reality of her visions and her loyalty to God until the end. These defining moments in Joan's life trace an extraordinary arc from divine inspiration through military triumph to martyrdom. Each event contributed to the creation of a legend that would inspire generations of French people and capture the imagination of people worldwide. 25 years after her execution, a posthumous retrial cleared her name, and in 1920, she was canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church, completing her transformation from condemned heretic to revered holy figure. The cultural and intellectual landscape of Joan of Arc's time was deeply rooted in religious beliefs and medieval political structures. The Catholic Church held immense power, serving as both a spiritual guide and a political force that permeated every aspect of medieval life. Churches and monasteries were centers of learning, culture, and social organization, with religious rituals marking the rhythm of daily life from birth to death. In medieval society, the Church's authority extended far beyond spiritual matters. It operated as a parallel government, maintaining its own courts, collecting taxes, and wielding significant influence over monarchs and nobles. The clergy served as advisors to rulers, diplomats in international relations, and were often the only literate members of society. This comprehensive religious framework made Joan's claims of direct divine communication particularly challenging to the established order. Mysticism and divine visions were common elements in medieval religious experience, but they were viewed with careful scrutiny by church authorities. While many saints and religious figures reported mystical experiences, the Church developed sophisticated methods to distinguish between true divine inspiration and potential heresy. Joan's visions were particularly controversial because they combined religious messages with political and military directives, crossing traditional boundaries between spiritual and temporal authority. The debate over true prophecy versus heresy was central to Joan's story. Church authorities had established specific criteria for evaluating claimed divine revelations, including consistency with Scripture, moral character of the visionary, and fruits of the revelation. Joan's case was complicated by the political implications of her visions, which explicitly supported the French cause against the English. This political dimension made objective theological evaluation nearly impossible in the charged atmosphere of the Hundred Years' War. Medieval military tactics were undergoing significant changes during Joan's time. Traditional cavalry charges by armored knights were being challenged by new developments in warfare, including the increasing use of infantry and early gunpowder weapons. Joan's approach to warfare, emphasizing aggressive tactics and the morale of troops, represented a departure from conventional military wisdom of the period. The concept of diplomatic relations and alliances in medieval Europe was complex, based on feudal obligations, family ties, and shifting political advantages. The Hundred Years' War wasn't simply a conflict between England and France, but rather a complex web of changing alliances involving Burgundy, Scotland, and various French noble factions. Joan's activities had to navigate this intricate diplomatic landscape. The medieval concept of just war was developed by theologians like Augustine and Aquinas, who established criteria for when warfare could be considered morally acceptable. These included proper authority, just cause, and right intention. Joan's mission challenged traditional understanding of proper authority by claiming divine mandate for military action, bypassing normal ecclesiastical and feudal channels. The intellectual climate of the period was dominated by scholastic philosophy, which sought to reconcile classical learning with Christian doctrine. This framework influenced how Joan's claims were evaluated during her trial, where complex theological arguments were used both to accuse and defend her. The trial records reveal sophisticated debates about the nature of divine revelation, the role of individual conscience, and the limits of ecclesiastical authority. Joan's military leadership introduced innovations in strategy and tactics. She emphasized speed and decisive action over the more cautious approaches typical of medieval warfare. Her use of artillery was notably advanced for the time, and she showed a remarkable understanding of the psychological aspects of warfare, using bold moves to inspire her troops and demoralize enemies. The cultural impact of Joan's experiences challenged fundamental medieval assumptions about gender roles, political authority, and divine revelation. Her story represented a unique intersection of medieval mysticism, military innovation, and emerging national consciousness. The intellectual debates surrounding her actions and trial continue to provide insights into medieval thought and the complex relationship between religious faith, political power, and social change in medieval Europe. Joan of Arc's emergence on the international stage created profound ripples that extended far beyond the boundaries of France, challenging established norms and transforming medieval warfare and society. Her influence would continue to resonate through centuries of European history, affecting military strategy, gender roles, and the relationship between church and state. The English reaction to Joan's rise was initially one of dismissal, quickly followed by genuine alarm as her military successes mounted. English leadership, particularly John, Duke of Bedford, initially portrayed her as a witch or heretic to diminish her influence. However, as she achieved victory after victory, English morale suffered significantly. Documents from the period reveal growing anxiety among English troops, who began to fear they were fighting against divine intervention. This psychological impact proved as damaging to the English cause as actual military defeats. Joan's influence on military tactics was revolutionary for her time. She advocated for aggressive, decisive action rather than the cautious, siege-focused warfare typical of the period. Her emphasis on artillery use and rapid movement of troops represented a departure from traditional medieval military doctrine. She understood the importance of morale and psychological warfare, often sending letters to enemy commanders demanding their surrender in God's name. This combination of tactical innovation and psychological warfare would influence military thinking for generations. The perception of warfare itself underwent significant changes during Joan's campaigns. Her assertion that war could be divinely sanctioned, yet conducted with certain moral constraints, influenced the evolving concept of just war. She insisted on humane treatment of prisoners and civilians, and discouraged looting and unnecessary violence, practices that were commonplace in medieval warfare. Her approach helped establish new standards for military conduct that would influence future military leaders. Perhaps the most striking cultural shock of Joan's story was her role as a female warrior in an intensely patriarchal society. Medieval gender roles were rigid and clearly defined, with warfare being an exclusively male domain. Joan's success as a military leader forced contemporary society to grapple with exceptions to these established gender norms. She managed this by creating a unique personal image, wearing male clothing for practical and symbolic reasons while maintaining a reputation for strong religious devotion and personal purity. The tension between divine authority and ecclesiastical authority represented another significant cultural clash. Joan's claim of direct divine guidance challenged the Church's traditional role as intermediary between God and humanity. Her assertion that her voices took precedence over earthly religious authorities created a theological and political dilemma for the Church hierarchy. This conflict would later become central to her trial and eventual execution. The emergence of national identity versus traditional feudal loyalties marked another crucial area of cultural transformation. Joan's mission helped crystallize a sense of French national consciousness that transcended feudal obligations. Her portrayal of the conflict as not merely a dynastic dispute, but a holy war for French sovereignty helped transform regional loyalties into national sentiment. This early nationalism challenged the traditional feudal system, where personal loyalties to local lords often superseded broader national affiliations. Joan's influence on institutional power structures was equally significant. Her ability to command armies and influence royal policy, without noble birth or formal education, challenged the rigid social hierarchy of medieval society. She demonstrated that authority could derive from sources other than traditional social structures. In her case, claimed divine mandate and military success. The international diplomatic ramifications of Joan's activities were far-reaching. Her success encouraged Scottish support for the French cause and influenced diplomatic relations throughout Europe. The political implications of her trial and execution affected international relations for years afterward, particularly between France and England, and between various Christian kingdoms and the Catholic Church. After her death, Joan's influence continued to grow. Her story became a powerful symbol of French national identity and female empowerment. Different groups throughout history have interpreted her legacy according to their own needs, as a religious martyr, a proto-feminist icon, or a symbol of national resistance against foreign domination. Her influence on military strategy, particularly the importance of morale and decisive action, would be studied by military leaders for centuries. The cultural tensions exposed by Joan's career, between gender roles, religious authority, and political loyalty, continue to resonate. Her story demonstrates how exceptional individuals can challenge and transform established social systems, even if they ultimately face resistance from those same systems. The international response to her achievements, both during her lifetime and after, reveals how profoundly one person can impact the cultural and political landscape of an entire era. Joan of Arc's enduring legacy spans nearly 6 centuries, profoundly influencing history, culture, and society well beyond medieval France. Her impact on the Hundred Years' War was decisive, marking a turning point that would eventually lead to French victory. By raising the siege of Orleans and enabling Charles VII's coronation at Reims, she revitalized French morale and reshaped the conflict's dynamics. These military achievements, however, represent only a fraction of her lasting historical significance. As a symbol of French nationalism, Joan's influence grew significantly after her death. During the French Revolution, she emerged as a powerful symbol of resistance against oppression. Her image was later invoked during both World Wars, particularly during the French resistance in World War II. Her story became intrinsically linked with French national identity, representing the spirit of resistance against foreign domination and the triumph of conviction over overwhelming odds. The process of rehabilitation, initiated in 1456 under Charles VII, marked the first step in transforming Joan's legacy from condemned heretic to national hero. This legal procedure, which involved gathering testimony from witnesses to her life and campaigns, provided crucial historical documentation while beginning the long process of officially recognizing her importance. The trial of rehabilitation systematically dismantled the charges that had led to her execution, establishing a foundation for her later veneration. Joan's canonization in 1920 represented a remarkable historical journey, from condemned heretic to Catholic saint. This process reflected changing attitudes within the Catholic Church and broader society regarding religious authority, gender roles, and individual spiritual experience. The timing of her canonization, shortly after World War I, added additional significance as France sought to heal from another devastating conflict. In contemporary context, Joan's story resonates powerfully with modern discussions about female leadership and gender equality. Her success in a male-dominated field challenges persistent gender stereotypes and provides an historical example of female military leadership. Modern military academies and leadership programs often study her tactical innovations and leadership style, finding relevant lessons for contemporary warfare and organizational management. Joan's demonstration of personal conviction in the face of institutional opposition continues to inspire religious and secular audiences alike. Her unwavering adherence to her beliefs, despite intense pressure and ultimately death, speaks to fundamental human experiences of standing up for one's principles. This aspect of her story has particular relevance in an era where individuals increasingly find themselves challenging established systems and authorities. In art and culture, Joan's image has been continuously reinterpreted through the centuries. She has been the subject of numerous plays, films, novels, and artistic works, each reflecting the priorities and perspectives of its time. From Shakespeare's unflattering portrayal in Henry VI to Mark Twain's admiring biographical work, from Carl Dreyer's silent film masterpiece to modern television adaptations, her story continues to captivate creators and audiences alike. The diversity of Joan's representation in art and literature reflects her complex legacy. She has been portrayed as a warrior, a saint, a proto-feminist, a nationalist symbol, and a voice of conscience against institutional power. These varying interpretations demonstrate her story's remarkable adaptability to different historical and cultural contexts while maintaining its core themes of conviction, courage, and resistance to oppression. Her relevance to contemporary social justice movements is particularly noteworthy. Joan's struggle against institutional power and her advocacy for what she believed was right resonates with modern movements for social change. Her example of speaking truth to power, despite severe consequences, continues to inspire activists and reformers worldwide. The historical documentation of Joan's life, particularly through her trial records, provides an unusually detailed window into medieval life and thought. These records continue to offer valuable insights for historians, theologians, and scholars in various fields. The thoroughness of both her condemnation trial and rehabilitation process provides rare contemporary accounts of medieval judicial procedures and social attitudes. Joan's legacy teaches enduring lessons about leadership, conviction, and the power of individual action to change history. Her story demonstrates how a single person, regardless of background or social status, can profoundly impact their world through unwavering commitment to their beliefs. This message continues to resonate across cultural and temporal boundaries, making her story as relevant today as it was in the 15th century. Joan of Arc's legacy transcends her historical moment, offering insights and inspiration for contemporary challenges. Her example of courage, leadership, and unwavering conviction continues to resonate with new generations facing their own struggles for justice and truth. Whether viewed as a saint, a warrior, a leader, or a symbol of resistance, Joan's story remains a powerful testament to the potential for individual action to transform society. Joan of Arc continues to inspire people today. What aspects of her extraordinary story resonate most with you? Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to Medieval Chronicles, and activate notifications for more fascinating stories about figures who changed the course of the Middle Ages.